Thanks to all of you for being here. So we have a very illustrious panel and a lot to talk about, but why don't we start by talking about last night? So...
That's so provocative.
I know. Last night were the Oscars. There was a lot of discussion.
That was very... I half watched them.
A lot of discussion about diversity in Hollywood. It's been going on for the last few months, prompted by the lack of nominations for non-white actors. At the same time, Broadway seems to be having the most diverse season it has ever had. So what I want to ask you all is, do you think there's something fundamentally different between what's going on Broadway and what's going on in Hollywood? Or is this just an anomaly of this year?
Oof.
I'm happy to start. I'm happy to
I thought we were going to start.
Last year's Tonys looked exactly like this year's Oscars. It's impossible to predict a season. It comes down to 3 Broadway owners who have all the theaters. It comes to what's ready and what's in the pipeline. It is a lovely accident that my show, for example, is in the same season as Allegiance and On Your Feet and Shuffle Along and Color Purple and all these incredible casts with not only actors of color, but creative teams of color. That's a wonderful thing, and I'm really proud to be a part of it. But it is an accident of timing. It's a wonderful accident of timing, but don't pat yourselves on the back too hard. That's my feeling on it, our job is not to sort of figure out trends. Our job is to make the things. And where we land is where we land. I'm happy to have landed at this moment with this particular show.
I do have to say, though, that Lin-Manuel and his team and Oskar made sure that at Fun Home that we were in separate seasons, because they could have easily come in, and in choosing not to, they allowed a certain other kind of diversity, because, Fun Home, I don't think it exactly looked like the Oscars, and I think, I'd have to look back on who was there, but having a butch protagonist in a musical, I never thought in my lifetime that would happen in a musical, ever. I think the things that we were trying to do with Caroline or change, it seemed miraculous, but I also feel like there are people we watch out for each other as best we can. You can't always do that, but that's what they did. And so they made sure that happened for us, and then it got divided up, because I think that there is a template of, let me say, paucity, or there's not a lot for everyone, but that's not true. Sometimes we just have to make sure that the design works that way.
Danai, I saw you nodding earlier. You're obviously telling a story that's unusual for Broadway. Tell me a little about your reflection on this.
Well, yeah, no, I just think I was agreeing with Lynn, because, really, you can pat yourselves on the back. We can, as a theater community, if we have 10 seasons like this in a row, you know what I mean? Because it can be that type of fluctuation that, even Chris Rock was referring to a little bit in his speech yesterday, in his opening monologue, which is that component where sometimes there's just nothing, and often there are many years that go by where there's very little diversity, and then it sort of comes out, and you're like, oh, there's some diversity, but it happens the same way with the Broadway seasons. So.
I will tell you another thing I'm enormously proud of was the season I was a part of at the Public, which I think was the most diverse season I've ever seen from an off-Broadway company ever. I mean, it was me and Lemon Anderson and Susan Laurie Parks. It was an incredibly diverse season of creators. Not just casts, but creators. And that's if you look at the conversation that's been happening in Hollywood, that's where the change happens. It's about creating opportunity, and that's where it starts. So I was very proud of that. So well programmed, Mr. Eustis.
Thank you, sir. We would think that, wouldn't we? But the thing I just want to say, Mike, is I can't speak to Broadway because I don't program for Broadway. I program for the Public, and then some shows move uptown. But at the Public, it's intentional. There's absolutely no question that we are very intentionally trying to say, how do we make our season, our shows, actually reflect the diversity of this country, actually give voice to people who don't have voice, actually try and change the narrative of who gets to be the subject of the story, who gets to be not the object of history, but the subject of it. And the Public has been trying to do that since Joe Papp founded it. It intensified those efforts under my predecessor, George Wolfe, who did a spectacular job of changing the complexion of the theater, and we still try to do it. I like to think that it's not just accidental, that what's actually happening is that now in the commercial world, where obviously we have to have a much broader reach, there's beginning to be a recognition that the audience is changing, that the demand for actually the world they live in to be reflected on stage is changing, that is something. I hope this is not just a seasonal variation. I hope this is, but what I can promise you is that we're trying not to make it a seasonal variation.
And to be sure, Fun Home recouping is a triumph for producers to try to get new work on Broadway and original work on Broadway. Hamilton making money is a triumph because what it says, the message it sends to producers is you do not have to rely on a formula, you do not have to rely on an adaptation of a well-loved product. You can take chances and make money for your investors in this business. And that's what gets more productions like that happening.
Right. Oscar, I want to double back to you. This year, just this year, we've seen criticism of the Manhattan Theatre Club over the lack of women playwrights. In Dublin, the Abbey Theatre had to apologize for a lack of women playwrights. In England, Trevor Nunn was pilloried for having an all-white cast for The War of the Roses. Is this kind of public scrutiny new? Is this a new factor for artistic directors? And what is the burden on you as you start to assemble a season?
I don't think it's new, but I think it's intensifying. I think it's a good thing that it's intensifying. It's intensified on me. We've just taken criticism for some of our casting in a show about transgender people. Because we've got some actual transgender actors and some cisgender actors playing transgender roles. So a lot of commentary that has stirred up discussion that's been exciting and useful. And one of our friends actually said to me at one point, you know, I'm just so sorry that you're doing this good work, but you're being persecuted for it. I said, well, hang on a sec. I'm artistic director of the Public Theater. I'm not actually being persecuted. I'm being criticized, which is a beautiful thing. That's exactly what the democracy is based on. So it does feel new to me.
Right.
Right? But it feels like it's a dialogue that we want to lean into and embrace and get messy about and make mistakes about. And, you know, that's the theater's based on the idea that dialogue is what reveals truth, right? Or sometimes, if you don't write book scenes, it's something else, but it's the same idea.
But I think that's also, you know, one of the reasons I really loved working at the Public is this idea that in art you don't make mistakes is a ridiculous thing. You know, one of the things that I was saying to my students, because I teach in order to not ever write again, that, it's really true, that, you know, fail spectacularly. And I think the failure is the thing. You are part of the conversation, you make big, brave decisions, and then somehow someone is going to say, wait a minute, there is this thing, like the language that you're using, you should say youth and not kids. Oh, really, why? Well, because this. And Shakina at Musical Theater Factory was saying there's all these new voice techniques for transgender artists that she is teaching because there's a need for it. And I thought, I would never have thought of that. That's why you do something, to reveal the thing you never would have thought of on your own. So one person's persecution is the beginning of, as you said, a dialogue. We can't avoid conflict. There'd be no drama on the stage or off the stage without that. And I think that's the thing about the Public, and what I really love that you're doing is saying, let's meet, let's have a town hall, let's be better. Let's challenge the way we were educated and be better for it.
So let's back up a little. The thing that links your three shows is that at some stage in your development, you were all at the Public Theater. So help me understand, what did you gain from your time at the Public? What did you learn? What changed for your shows? And I see you nodding.
I just do that.
Sorry.
I know, she's nodding in the green room
So,
too. Cheese plate,
You have the
nod.
most recent transfer. Your show's in previews now, Eclipsed, about to open on Broadway. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So this is a show that had been done at Woolly Mammoth, had been done at Yale, had a kind of hiatus, and is then done at the Public. What changes there? What did you learn?
It was really a fascinating year, actually, 2015, for Eclipsed. It had just been done in theater in Soweto, and then it was done in London, and I didn't get to Soweto, but I got to London, and I was in this room with these women, and what I love is the ensemble of women that come together, you know, and I was in this room with these women who are all from like different parts of the diaspora, largely, of course, because of London. They were all largely from the Caribbean, and some were African, and an Irish director, woman, and who I had interviewed. I interviewed a bunch of women, and that's who I picked, and she was amazing. I was amazed by that sisterhood in that room. And then, you know, we got it together for the public, and that happened. And then I was in a whole other room, and it was kind of the most exciting component to the play's development for me, because I hadn't really been developing it since 2009. But stepping into the public at that moment, there was I had a pair of fresh eyes, but I also had a whole new bunch of different pairs of fresh eyes around me that were really very deeply involved. I've worked with a lot of different theaters, and some, you know, the artistic directors are more involved than others. Some come and check in every now and then, and some are deeply involved. Hi, Oscar. You again. No, I'm kidding. But, you know, and that's a beautiful thing, because you have that type of collaboration and support, and it's very immediate. And between him and Mandy, it was kind of an amazing new, fresh way I could look at it. And I did rewrite a scene that was two scenes that were like kind of sitting there as kind of the problem part of the play for me for years, but I hadn't had the fresh eyes to look at it yet, or the right collaborators. Right. And so being able to be in that space, and you know, it was very special, as Lynn was saying, like the amount of diversity in the building at the time. Because actually my first play was directed by Robert O'Hara, and he was down the hall with a play he'd written, Barbecue, and then there was this awesome children's show going on at the same time, so there were kids running around all the time. And so it was really a very special environment, and I was coming from a show I shoot in Atlanta, and I'd fly in and out for like 4 or 5 days here and there, and you know, the environment change could not have been more, you know, huge, but it was just in the best way. I always got there and felt very supported and nourished, and I think that the play got to a place where I was like, I think I'm done with writing this play at that point.
It's a fantastic play. And I just have to say that Mandy Hackett, my associate artistic director, was really crucial to that work with Tom.
Yes, she was.
She's great.
She was. She's amazing.
I want to hear from Lynn and Jeanine, but let me ask you about how you see your role. Obviously, each of these shows has a director attached to it. How do you know when to intervene, when to back off, when to accept disagreement, when to engage?
Yes, Oscar, how do you know?
I don't intervene ever, I like to think. I'm just more or less helpful. But look, the reality is that the biggest part of my job is selecting what we do and who's doing it. And that's by far the most important thing that I do, is just pick the shows, help the cast, pick the director. And once those choices are made, those artists do incredible work. And then what I like to think, there was a biography of Thornton Wilder a number of years ago called The Enthusiast. And I like to, I just thought, oh, I hope somebody says that about me someday. Because it actually feels like what the great privilege I have is that in all of these artists' work, I love their work. I'm not pretending to love, I'm not loving their work as a job. I genuinely love their work. And then what I try and do is figure out, okay, if I love it, how can I help it become what it wants to be? How can I help them do what they want to do? And there's no rule book for that. That's completely different on every show. And sometimes it works pretty well, and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes people are polite to me and wait till I get out of the room. And sometimes it's, you know, but all of that's fine as long as it's actually, the job is to help these visions actually become real. And not real, become as perfectly themselves as possible, which is certainly something I felt like happened on Fun Home that I'm so proud of, is that show, at the end of it, isn't imitating anything. All of its influences have dropped away because you guys kept working and came up with something that was utterly uniquely itself, and that's exciting when that happens.
Jeanine, I have the sense that Fun Home of these 3 projects is the one that changed the most during its time at the public.
It wasn't so fun in the beginning.
So tell me, I mean, I know at one point there was a scene at Bruce's funeral. I know that there was,
Yes.
there was that you all
Why,
toyed with
why are you
how-
hurting me this much, Michael?
I know there was a lot of experimentation with how much of Alison Bechdel's cartoons to
Yeah.
use and how. Can you talk a little about how a show changes?
I work often with Tony Kushner, who I love deeply, and Tony, and that's how I met Oskar, because part of Caroline or Change was written in Oskar's home up in Providence. And when we started writing, and Tony said, this is not going to be anything like what we end up with, because I was questioning, I didn't understand his rewriting process. And so through Caroline or Change, I understood how to write quickly and as well as possibly in response to what you put in front of a paying, not a workshop audience, has to be a paying audience. And that what happened with us at Fun Home, we were upstairs. The thing that I love about the public is you're invited into, a home. You're in a giant home, and you go upstairs, and then there are all these other bedrooms, and everybody else is making their stuff, and then you come down to the living room where we went down to the Shiva, and then you go to another theater. And all the while you invite people in. And we changed it. And the thing that was very tricky for me was we had Alison Bechdel there. It was her family. It wasn't just a show. We were revealing something about her family. And for the first time, she and her brothers cried together during a preview at the Newman Theater. And that's when I thought, this show is not just about getting the drama right. It's about revealing something about people's lives. It matters in a way that I hadn't occurred to me before. And then that was why we had shed so many tears, and there were lots of tears about it, because we just wanted to reveal what its DNA was. And it had already existed as a book, and the book is so beautiful and so well received. And it was a life. It's a family and a life. A lot of Bruce's neighbors and cousins, they all came. The man who drove the ambulance and picked Bruce up after his suicide, he came to see the show. And then it took me through all those times where we were at the lab. The lab is a genius way to go out of town without going out of town. People pay $15. And it's so light on its feet. So you can change something immediately, and you say to the pianist who eventually wants to just murder you, here's a new song, and he will say, I hate you. And I think, I know. And then you put it in, and then Sam did this great thing, and he would go in front of the lab audience and say, you're going to leave here, and you're going to say, this show needs work, and you're going to be right. And you could feel in the audience going, okay, we're part of it. And then we would move over. And then we invited the orchestra in. But it was the first time that I thought, this is what development is. This is what it is,
Let me ask you about one specific example before I let you go. So the most famous song in the show is called Ring of Keys.
Oh, yeah.
Lisa Crone, your collaborator, was talking on a panel at BroadwayCon, and she said...
What did she say about me?
It was a Broadway?
I knew it.
Said that initially she thought the song was a terrible idea.
Yes,
that she was worried that you were that there was a possibility that the song was going to make fun of butch lesbians.
Yes.
And that it was sexualizing a child, and that audiences would chafe at both of those elements. She said she was wrong. She deferred to you. You were a genius, and it worked out. But she clearly
She said I was a what? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Michael. What did she say?
Tell me how you worked through that. How did you come to that song, knowing that it was, troublesome, that there were lots of ways it could go wrong?
I was really naive. I thought that because I had a certain kind of tough childhood, that I had been not, well, it turns out I'm endowed with other things I didn't know until I started working with Lisa. And I realized that what people, especially of this age, of my age, because I'm years old, is that they weren't afforded in adolescence. I mean, Lisa and people like that in that era, to be gay, they couldn't hold hands with someone in high school and write little heart things and all that stuff that we did, And so there's a consequence to that. It's not that you're just robbed of it. You're robbed, and it's going to come out in the spiritual physics. It's coming out later. With the physics of repression, it doesn't come out equally. It comes out 100-fold. That's what was so amazing, and I thought, oh, I didn't realize so many of these things. And so when we got the script, and I said, well, these women have to kiss. And she said, oh, no, you'll find out what the lilac ceiling is. And I thought, I don't know what you're talking about. We have to write this. And then I started going to see theater with her and movies where the butch woman comes on as a joke. Right. And then I got it. And I was with Lisa at something that we saw where it happened again, and I saw 2 tears going down. I thought, oh, that's what she's talking about. I will never let that happen. We will write it so well and so authentically. And in the panel, I was talking about it with someone today, the ring of keys is this big. And because my daughter, my beloved Sienna, when she was young, she would always play with these shiny keys. And I said to Lisa, if we make it about the keys, that shiny thing, those things that open all those doors, like the janitors. I love the janitors in my school. I was like, that guy's important. That guy has a lot of keys. Opens a lot of doors. And I thought, if that will bring the youth to it, that will bring the thing, and we'll get there. And we just established this unbelievable, I guess, the way that I felt empowered because I had not been excluded, and her trust in me that we would collaborate and write it really well. And so we traveled that road together.
Well, thank you. Lynn, I want to ask you about Hamilton and how it evolved. It had had a few chapters before the public, but then a significant chapter there. Let me ask you first about the water. So was there water at the end of the show when you began at the public?
Oh,
Reflecting
yeah.
pool.
Oh, yeah. The water, the Oscar, you're blindsiding me. Yes, we had a reflecting pool, and the notion was, and this was Tommy's notion, which is a beautiful one, of at the end of this is a show about people who are building something, and at the end of the show, we wouldn't see the Washington Monument. You'd see the beginning of the contemporary thing we live in. And so there was this reflecting pool, and Hamilton and Liza ended in front of the reflecting pool. And I said, I don't get it. And Tommy said, well, you wrote the show. If you don't get it, it needs to go. So it was gone. It was 2 previews, and it was gone. But that also speaks to the level of trust between Tommy and I. If Tommy believes something needs to happen, I'm with him because, again, on this particular show, I ended up writing the whole thing, which was not what we had designed going in. It's just sort of how it happened. And so Tommy really was the other side of my brain. He was the co-dramaturg. He's the one who is out in the audience and tells me if something is working or if it's not. So for me to not get it, he's like, cool, great. Because the entire, I mean, every decision in the show, and Tommy did this so brilliantly, is about eliminating any distance between this story, which happened with old dead white men on your money, and a contemporary audience. It's about making those people real to us for the amount of time we get to spend with them. So anything that distanced us went away. And one of the first things we cut, I think we came in at 3 hours at our first preview performance at the public. That is not, we did not want to outlast Les Mis, although we love Les Mis. So the first thing we cut was one of the best verses I have ever written, which was something I did. It was Hamilton's response to John Adams, because John Adams, while the verse was great, it's a character we never see. So to what end? And so, we had a bunch of things we knew we needed to cut, but Tommy was so smart to say, we're going to cut that first, so that we show everyone in the room it's not about your part, it's not about how well you're doing it, it's not about the quality of the thing or how it's being performed, it's about what serves the piece best. So let's cut the writer's best 16 bars to start. No, but it's great, and it sends the message to the room. It's all about the piece. It's not about anyone's ego, and everyone put their egos to the side as we shaped this thing into the best version of what it could be.
And why Hamilton was already much buzzed about before you began. at the public. Why did you decide to go with a nonprofit for your sort of
I've
first
always
run?
wanted to be a part of the public. My parents were sitting in the front row. They went and saw Runaways on their wedding night, which is such a crazy show to see on your wedding night.
Whoa, wait a minute. Come see it on your anniversary at City Center then.
Yes, you can. Nice plug.
Jeanine is going to be,
I'm just saying.
for those of you who don't know, Jeanine also runs Encore's Offset.
But you know, homeless runaway teens, that's not how most people spend their wedding night. But my parents said, that's a Puerto Rican writer, it's the public. The public did Chorus Line. We're going to see a musical, a Broadway musical on our wedding night. And that's what it was. I think the first show, one of the first shows I remember seeing was a production of Midsummer Night's Dream in Central Park at the Delacorte. So it's just been a legacy I've wanted to be a part of prior to anything. Then the other half of that is I got introduced to the public through Jeremy McCarter. Jeremy McCarter used to be a critic for New York Magazine, and he wrote sort of the first review of Heights that really got it. It wasn't like, oh, hippity hoppin'. It was like, oh, he's using it, like, he just got it. And so we became that rarest of things, the wolf and the sheepdog. Like, we became,
Sheepdog?
yeah, you know how those old Warner Brothers cartoons are like, hello, Sam, hello, Ralph, and then they beat the crap out of each other all day, and then they clock out. That's how most critic-writer relationships are.
I mean, who's
Jeremy and
better
I-
than Lin-Manuel? I'm just saying, like, who's better?
Jeremy and I actually became friends despite him being a critic and my being a writer. And he was one of the first people I told about Hamilton when I read Chernow's book, and when he stopped being a critic and started working for the public, introduced me to Oskar. And then we just kind of never stopped talking. And it's hard to overstate what being a professional enthusiast means. And now I get to talk about Oskar for a little bit. Because what Oskar does is he looks at what you've written and he pitches you an even better version of the musical than you had in mind. He said, what you're really writing about, Lynn. He said, first of all, we could open it tomorrow and it'll be the best thing in the history
Oh my God,
of
he
musicals
told
of all
us
time.
that too.
Of course he did. But that's the thing. But here's the thing. He's not lying. Because when I asked him, how's Eclipsed going? He said, if we get this right, it will be one of the most important things we have ever done at the company. It is not, that's his job. And he pitches you a version of the show and he says, so what you've done is you've managed to connect this. So if you don't change another word, it's fine, I'm happy. Here are the thoughts I have. And then we push and we pull and we talk about every moment and the moments he talks about grand arcs and the moments we can circle to make those grand arcs that he sees in the work. Because he's got the bird's eye view, Tommy and I in the weeds, Jeffrey Sellers somewhere in the middle. He's got that view. And I can tell you most excitingly where it happened, I'll give you a very specific instance, is Hamilton's final moments. I delayed writing Hamilton's final moments until the very last, I think 3 days before we started Tech at the Public, I wrote it. On New Year's Day, 2015. From 1 till about 5 in the morning on January 2nd. And one, that's partly Tommy Cale's fault, because Tommy has a way of prognosticating my procrastination. He will notice that we're a week away from Tech and Hamilton hasn't died yet. And he'll just call it. He literally said to me, I feel like this is going to be a New Year's baby. And I was like, I don't know what that means. And he said, well, you're learning choreography and you're fixing 50 other things, and it's going to come to you in the first moment off you have. And he was absolutely right. The morning of New Year's Day, I had my infant son on my chest. It was the quietest I could remember for my entire life. And I said, oh, quiet. We haven't done quiet. Right. We have a thing that never stops singing and rapping or dancing. And quiet is the one card we haven't played in our show. Right. Then I set about writing Hamilton's final words in total silence as opposed to the rest of the show. And then here's where Oskar comes in and starts pushing. I wrote a version at the Public that I was very happy with. But where Oskar and I continued to disagree, or what we pushed on, was why does Hamilton throw it away? which is a question that historians have been trying to answer for 200 some odd years. And I'm not particularly interested in answering. I'm interested in what's going on in his head. I don't know that that equals why does he throw it away. They're different things. And so I wrote this version that said, I imagine death so much it feels more like a memory. This is where it gets me, on my feet, several feet ahead of me. I see it coming. I don't run or fire my gun. I let it be. There is no beat, no melody. And he kept pushing. He kept pushing. He also has a much worse opinion of Burr than I do. So there's that undercurrent in the pushing. I don't think he's history's greatest monster. I can't, because I have to be him when I'm writing him. I have to love them all. I don't know how to write any other way. I have to love everyone I'm embodying. The last thing that happened, the show's pretty much frozen. We're on Broadway. And he goes, well, okay, so you're right. Maybe he goes, he's deciding to throw away his shot, but that's still a hard call to make. Maybe he's still struggling with it in that final moment. And I went, so all of those, I don't run or fire my gun, I let it be, become questions. And it's the difference between, I imagine death so much feels more like a memory. Is this where it gets me? On my feet, several feet ahead of me. I see it coming. Do I run or fire my gun or let it be? There is no beat, no melody. Now we don't know what the heck's going to happen. And we get the thing, we get it every night, that great Shakespearean drama has, which is, you know that she's going to be asleep when he takes the poison and she's not going to wake up in time. But if it's a good production, you still go, Juliet, wake up! We know going in, we know from our opening number, if we don't know going in, that Burr's going to shoot Hamilton. But because those are questions instead of answers, we still get gasps on the gunshot. And that's thanks to Oskar Eustis.
But I have to say, in a much more niche world here of dramaturgy, that was a great moment for me, because after pounding on him for not explaining why Hamilton throws away his shot, I suddenly actually said to him, oh, I'm giving you the same notes that I would be giving Shakespeare. He doesn't explain this stuff either. And I suddenly realized you were absolutely right to not explain it. It was just we had to elevate the question about it.
Oskar, all three of these shows are on Broadway. You're running a nonprofit that has sent 40 some odd shows to Broadway since Hair. How do you know, how does the Broadway aspiration affect what you're doing, and how do you avoid being kind of corrupted by the kind of commercial potential of projects that you're working on?
Well, I hope the way we do it is by the ethos of the public theater that is embodied in the staff, which is an extraordinary staff, the board, all of the people, the audience, the people who believe in the public. We're not there to create commercial shows. We're not there to make a profit. We're there to make these shows, these artistic expressions, the most beautiful, the most substantive, the most meaningful thing they can be. What I also believe is that if we do that well enough, there's going to be bigger audiences for them. And some of them are going to be big enough audiences that they're going to move uptown, and that's great. Where we would get in trouble, the advantage, I hope, of coming to the public is we're not saying, how can we sell this? We're protected by the bubble of a different intentionality other than market intentionality. And that's something that, I mean, honestly, television has figured this out. There was a conversation I was having with Colin Callender, who was then president of HBO, when we were making the Angels movie. And he told me it was the most expensive movie ever made for television. And I said, well, are you going to make your money back? He said, I don't know, and we'll never know. That's not how we count it here. What we're trying to do is elevate the brand by doing shows that make you have to subscribe to HBO. That's exactly the protection that the nonprofit is trying to provide. With this particular show, this particular night, this particular run, we just have to make it as good as possible. And if we do, that elevates the public's brand, which ends up helping us in all sorts of ways. And for those shows that can reach a commercial audience, they'll do it. The beauty of that is partly in the cultural impact the show has once it moves to Broadway, the number of people it can reach, the way it can influence the conversation. You have to love that. And you also have to love the fact that it compensates artists. in a much more meaningful way than we can do. Because, of course, the greatest subsidizers of all the work at the nonprofit theater are the artists, who are working for so much less than they deserve, and they are subsidizing the work. And, of course, it's a beautiful thing for me to see artists get a chance to actually be compensated when the shows move uptown.
It's interesting, the public, of course, most famously brought A Chorus Line to Broadway.
Yep.
That show was so successful that it supported the public for years. I gather that something fundamental has changed in the relationship between nonprofits and Broadway, so that no matter how successful Hamilton is, it would never have the same impact that A Chorus Line had, that there's something.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of changes that have happened. One of the biggest ones is at the time Chorus Line moved to Broadway, Broadway was in very, very serious trouble, and there were an awful lot of dark theaters, which made the process of moving it and the deal making completely different than it would be nowadays when Broadway is booming and there's, you know, shows circling the airport looking for shows again. However, I have to say that the impact that Fun Home, that Hamilton, that Eclipsed has economically on the public is not insubstantial. It's a definite help. And of course, for us, what it does is you just plow it back into funding the work we do. Is no individual is profiting from it. None of us individually are making money, but the theater itself is definitely prospering, and this helps.
I think a lot of people don't understand it. I don't know how, I mean, it's a patchwork quilt. Often, you know, we teach and we write things, but for the first 5 years of Fun Home, I think I made $10,000. You make nothing when you're writing. I've never made any money. It's not how it works. And Fun Home took 7 years. And so after 7 years, you're hoping, it's all about the back end, every bit of it. And the time when I was writing Caroline or Change, and I said to George Seawolf, who's a dear friend, I can't write the show now because I'm out of money. And he said, I'll find you the money. I will find you the money. That's what we do. That's what we do. We're going to make sure. I could never have written it unless he had found me, you know, he found me $30,000 out of the public, and I had a little girl, and there was just no way to write it. So it's, when you're saying the compensation, I think people think, oh, there's this giant coffer. It's going back to make sure that people like the us's are functioning and being able to pay rent. You know, very few people make a killing in this business, you know.
And I find it really, I mean, that's what I love about working at nonprofit theaters, is there's also so much protection around you as a creator, as an artist, because, you know, there's the steps that Eclipsed has taken is, it was at the public first, and it was being co-produced also by commercial producers, Stephen Bird and Aaliyah Brown, and then they helped take it, you know, they took it uptown with the public. The beauty of mounting it and creating a whole new production with the public was I had the creative comfort of knowing that I was going to be working with these very rigorous minds and creative, you know, giants who were going to help me get it to its best form before it then, you know, went out uptown, where, you know, there's less of that, of course, because it's commercial theater. So that's what I love about working. That's what I loved about working there, is you have that creative safeguard, and you know that you're in the hands of people who are just there for the craft, for the art, for the story, to be told at its best. And that is a deep comfort.
So we've been talking about these, the 3 projects you all are doing, which are all artistically ambitious and intellectually challenging. One of the things that has struck me since starting this beat about a year ago is I think I expected that there would be a lot more sort of aesthetic snobbery in the theater world, and that there would be people who worked on those kinds of projects and people who worked on more popular entertainment. And yes, all 3 of you are in different ways also involved with popular culture. You worked on Shrek, you've done a series of projects with Disney, you're on The Walking Dead. Are those just financial decisions, or do they like feed some kind of other aspect of your creative hunger, or how do you simultaneously do these very different kinds of projects?
Well, actually, I mean, funnily for me, I mean, I was thinking about that earlier, because it's funny, a lot of my Walking Dead cast and producers came and saw Eclipsed, and they said something that I felt when I first auditioned for The Walking Dead, which was, they were like, oh, this plays like our show. And I was like, it really kind of is. Like, it's the same thing. It really functions on the same premise, which is why, I was, I was, of course, an artist just trying to make it and trying to pay my bills and everything. But, I still was very picky about, when you sign that 7-year contract, like who you do that with, and there were times I had turned some things down because I was like, that's a cop show. I can't be a cop for 7 years, no offense. I can't do it, But like coming across this particular project, The Walking Dead, I was like, I just got sucked in. I was like, as I started to watch it, I was scared of cat. I had never watched anything scary. I just like, why do I want to be scared? Too much of a control freak for that. But the watching it, I just got completely hooked. And what hooked me in, not only because the actors on the show were amazing, and a lot of them turns out are also from theater, but also the stories were so richly told. But also there was a premise in there that I was like, this feels like when I wrote Eclipsed, which was, if the world got this dire, who would you become? You're not gonna be who you are today. And I was like, that's exactly what got me totally hooked into writing Eclipsed and putting stories of voices that you never hear in front of people and saying you're gonna be one of these 5 women in some way, shape, or form, a little bit. You gotta see a bit of yourself in here, even though these women are so separate from who you think about daily. And so watching The Walking Dead and coming across this particular character who was at that time only on the comic book page, and I was like, who is this? Dreadlocks, a sword, and very much not who she was before this whole world changed. I was like, she felt like the women I researched who became rebel fighters. And so that really got me hooked in. And then, thank God, it's an amazing environment to be in, to create in. I mean, people are there, talk about egos being left at home. Like, people are there to, of course, helmed by the astounding Andy Lincoln. Like, he helms it in a way where it's just about the creative, it feels like nonprofit theater, like it's just about that creative energy being protected and people being celebrated and encouraged. And thank God for that, because we're running around in the woods for real in Georgia in July, and getting bitten by ticks. It's all really happening, and
it has a great pop-up book.
Yeah, I saw that actually. It's really cool.
Have you seen that pop-up book?
It's crazy.
Oh, it's
I have to say, I said this to you when we started working on Eclipse. It feels even more specifically that your project of working on women's relationship to violence and self-protection, and how empowerment through violence is literally a double-edged sword, and how to work it. I'm a Walking Dead fan. And it just feels like I'm watching you work that project as an actress, and I'm watching you work that project as a writer, and that feels like a beautiful thing.
Thank you.
I think the high-low, I don't know, I got on a plane once and I had Aristotle and Danielle Steele. And the stewardess said, who are you? And I was like, I'm both. I always feel like if I'm gonna go down a fiery crash, I wanna be reading trash, but I really wanna understand how I feel, so I'm reading the poetic. I think that the thing that I love, I've seen all of their works. I was just down, I saw Hamilton in the workshop stage, and right at the end of the act, when the actors came back into the second act, I stood up in this really totally ridiculous way, remember?
Yeah.
It was so...
You don't forget when Jeanine Tesori stands up at the top of your act and you haven't done anything yet.
I know. I just have to just say one thing, that Lin-Manuel is wearing Sunday in the Park socks, and we just haven't talked about it, but...
Wow.
Bernadette Peters, right around the ankle. And the way that I felt about Eclipse, which was just so amazing to me, it pulled my spirit back. There's this sense of play, and everybody, when I work with Oskar, when I work with George or Tony, anybody, there are these people who want to come into play. And I think you have to have that sense that, you're a Nintendo. What's the play thing that you have? What do you do?
PS3?
Yeah, the PS3. I think you had bunk beds in the Heights, right?
I had a top bunk bed.
Okay. But I think that's the thing, is that we don't lose, we're all nesting dolls, and we don't lose the sense of who we were. I think that's one of the reasons I've figured out a lot of people who are artists, they keep that sense alive of who they remember themselves to be at a really young age. I mean, I played the Garbage Pail Kids theme when I gave Lin-Manuel one of his 50 awards that he's getting at the moment.
You have to explain that. That makes no sense.
Okay. Lin wrote a theme, like the first thing he wrote, which his parents recorded, was the Garbage Pail.
There was a song I wrote when I was 5. I found it on the back of a Fisher Price tape called "The Garbage Pail Kids Are in Town."
And it just won a Grammy also, I'm just saying. But really, it's got such, I mean, at not even 4 years old, there's this sense, and I thought, oh, that's where he is. This sense of rhythm and fun and all of those things, and I thought, oh my God, it's like we are and we were at the same time, if you're lucky enough to be able to do something to keep those things alive. And when I was watching the play at Eclipsed and the way that all these women were represented, I thought, I bet that's all of her there. The way that it's displayed, this peacock-like spectrum of these women. It was amazing to watch both of these artists at work.
Yeah, it's funny. Today is Leap Day, and I also noticed it's Saul Williams' birthday. Saul Williams is one of my favorite poets. And in my brain, I went, of course he's 10 years old. Because he's so connected to that thing in his writing.
Yeah.
He's connected to sort of everything within himself, but I think we all aspire to that, and I think that's what people are responding to about Hamilton, is that there is no differentiation between, like the way you put the question, there's no snobby aesthetic at work. It's whatever works to tell the story, whether that's a Run DMC reference or it's a Macbeth reference. There's no high and low at all. It's whatever serves the story. And I think, I get a lot of questions about cultural baggage, but I don't get a lot of cultural baggage in the theater from the audience. It's more often than not, it's just, I didn't know that, or I didn't know about this genre of music, and now I know this. But there's something about this story being told this way that connects dots for people that wouldn't have connected them otherwise because they've got cultural baggage attached to hip-hop music or musical theater music or American history in general. But by sort of throwing the kitchen sink at it, you scramble them so they can just sit back and enjoy the ride.
Or I would actually put it even a little more grandiosely than that.
Of course you would. That's your job, the enthusiast.
No, but, you know, because it's also, I have to say, it's one of the core ideas behind the public theater, which is it's a big tent, and all of this stuff belongs here. The musicals belong here, the experimental theater belongs here, the new plays belong here, Shakespeare belongs here. We're not separate categories. We're all part of one big theater community, which is an analogy for saying when we watch Hamilton, part of the thrill is going, oh yeah, we are one country. Oh yeah, hip hop does belong next to American history. Oh yeah, musical theater is, all of that, it belongs together because we really are one. We aren't separated in that way. And I think the sort of almost atavistic response that audiences have to it is they're feeling reflected back to them their whole country. They're suddenly being told, you're part of the whole country. You're not one part of it. And we are so hungry to believe that right now, and for progressives, which is the most political thing I'll say tonight. I'm a progressive. For progressives, we're so hungry to feel patriotic. We're so hungry to actually remember what the promise of America is. And suddenly, there it is.
Yeah, I've not had the pleasure of watching Fun Home yet, and I will watch it this week, and I look forward to it deeply. I did get to watch Hamilton by some fluke. I managed to get into Hamilton through the public's help. Yeah, it's the only way. It's the only way, guys. Befriend this guy, because I'm sorry. And it was exactly that. I mean, it was an amazing thing. I'm a hyphenated American for a couple reasons. Because, well, you know, because I'm not Native American, I'm Zimbabwean American, so I come from here and I don't at the same time, and I have these bicultural lenses I wear, and I can't change them. They'll just always be how I see things. But seeing how, watching it, and with a group of people, you know, the theater crowd of Broadway, you know, and I'm sitting in an area where I definitely am the only person who looks like me for a while, like. You know, But I loved it. I loved watching this with that crowd, you know, and it was this amazing ownership of America that was taking place on that stage. You know, when you see those guys on Our Money embodied, you weren't performing that night, but I know, but it was amazing. Still astounding, but you know, to see this plethora of America, these colors of America, you know, and all those sounds of America, you know, and I'm like, some of the stuff he was going into, there was some like, you know, there was some like kind of 90s rap stuff that was happening, and I just started like name it and go with it, and folks around me are like, what is? She knows something we don't know. Oh, like it's all ours though, y'all. It's everything, like it's everybody's, you know. And it was amazing. It was an amazing, amazing theatrical experience. Best I've ever had.
Let me follow up on that, Lynn and Oskar. I wanted to ask you about one of the challenges for Hamilton, of course, is that it's become so successful that it's inaccessible to many people, and people are paying huge amounts of money to get tickets. How do you process this? It seems like in some ways, of course, you want to be successful. In other ways, it seems at odds with what you aspired to.
No, I'm not going to answer it. Do you want to go first, or shall I?
You can go first, or I can go first, whichever you prefer.
Okay. That's the inherent contradiction of the magic of theater. This is being live streamed, but you're having a different experience in the audience than the people at home are having, who could be knitting, or could be pausing, or could be watching. It's a different thing to be in that room. I don't know how to solve the problem of the wonderful problem of a lot of people want to see our show. I think you should write your congressman about resale tickets. I love that lady who caught those guys.
Yeah, I just saw that
in the post. Because but again, that's above my pay grade. My job's to make the thing. My other job, I feel, as the writer, is to, especially with this show, make sure we can get as many kids into the audience as possible. And so that was our mission as possible. And 20,000 school kids are going to see Hamilton this year, thanks to a generous grant from the Rockefeller Foundation and our producers setting aside matinees just for that. But that being said, you know, what I get a lot on Twitter is like, please film it so I can watch it. And I was like, that is an act of translation. You are not getting the same thing as the people in the audience are having that night. Would I love to film it, this cast? And yes, I would love to do that. But it's not the same thing. So I don't know how to solve that problem, because when the robots win and technology takes over everything, we are still going to be telling each other stories in the dark. That's the magic of theater. And so just filming it and putting it out is not the answer to me.
Men make history, but they do not make it in conditions of their own choosing, said Karl Marx. Whoops. You know, the fact is that we are in a time when capitalism has succeeded all around the world. Not everywhere, but around. It is the hegemonic system. And what that means is that is how success happens in this world. It's a profit-making enterprise. That's what's happening with Hamilton. That's, you know, that's what it is right now. So what can we do? We can continue to figure out how do we ameliorate the most negative effects of that. And I got to say, Jeffrey Seller and the Rockefeller Foundation and Lynn and the entire team have done a magnificent job. This 20,000 public school kids who are going to see Hamilton, not just this year, but every year going forward, that's a huge deal. That's a huge effort. And, you know, again, does it solve the problem of how expensive the tickets are? No. The fact that Hamilton's going to, 18 months from now, have 4 companies, the fact that it's going to run for a very long time, the fact that we are going to continue to discuss, me as a friend of the court and then the court itself, discuss how we can continue to provide access, that's real. But again, there's no, nobody's got a magic bullet. I shouldn't have brought up bullets in this context. Nobody has got a magic solution to how we deal with this, because it's the society we're swimming in.
So usually at these panels, I don't ask people about their vacation habits, but since both Lynn and Danai have had interesting vacation experiences, I want to ask you, so who picks up a copy of a biography of Alexander Hamilton on vacation?
I do, it turns out.
What prompted that?
What prompted it was I only wanted one book to take on the beach. Ron's book had great reviews. It was a bestseller. It was a finalist for all these awards. And I like biographies. I love to go escape in someone else's life. I'm not a history buff. I mean, I guess I'm not even one now. I fell in love with Hamilton's story, and that's why the show exists. But my favorite book growing up was the autobiography of Chuck Jones, Chuck a Buck. I bought it as a kid because it came with a Wile E. Coyote flip book on the side. If you flip the pages, you could see Wile E. Coyote chase the Roadrunner and then fall down the margin of the page. When you open it and read it every year, as I would do, you realize this is one of the greatest books about the creative process you will ever read, because Chuck Jones and his cohorts, Tex Avery and Friz Freleng, had to make these exactly 6-minute short animated movies. They had a cheap producer, so they could not be a frame longer. And within those constructs, they created some of the most iconic characters the world has ever seen. Bugs Bunny, Yosemite Sam, insert your favorite here. It's a beautiful book about the creative process, and I was never good at drawing, but I learned a lot about the creative process just from having that book around my house. So I go to the biography section, and that's why I grabbed that book. I didn't know lightning was going to hit me in the face.
Yeah. So, I guess maybe speaking of lightning hitting one in the face, Danai, so last month you went on a Walking Dead cruise.
How do you know that?
Yeah, this is on some...
You've heard of the internet. So there are pictures of, like, people, a cruise filled with zombies. Like, what?
Pictures of what?
A cruise filled with zombies, people all made up, and, like, what was this like? What?
Oh, yeah, it was actually a lot of fun. Like, I mean, honestly, it wasn't like you're around, there are various activities going on that you may or may not even be privy to. So, the time that I spent with the fans was awesome. You go down, you do a panel, you sign for them, you have chats, you do photos with them, things like that. And it's actually a really nice one-on-one bonding experience to have with fans, because I don't do a lot with social media, and so it's a way of just connecting with fans in a different type of way. And then you're on this ship, and initially it sounds like, what? But it actually turned out to be kind of one of the funnest Comic-Con experiences I've ever had. But like, there are a lot of things that were happening that I was not aware of. So in terms of like people getting made up as zombies and things like that, those are things that the astounding Mr. Greg Nicotero handled, and he's the man behind all the work, everything you see on the show in terms of, the makeup and everything is his work. And so he was on the cruise as well. So I know that they were having a good time with him.
If we can, in a minute or two, start taking questions. I can't see, but I think there are mic stands somewhere, so if people want to start lining up, or there will be mic stands. Danai, let me ask you, while people are getting lined up, a completely different question. So in both, you wrote a play called The Convert.
I did.
It's about colonialism. One never sees the colonizers. In Eclipsed, it's about women who are living with a rebel warlord, abused by him. One never sees the warlords. Tell me about the writing decision about who to show and who not to show.
Well, I guess because I grew up in Southern Africa, though I was born in the Midwest. And so I'd never, I grew up actually, though I was in Southern Africa, I was watching a lot of Western media. I mean, and you still do. You go there and, all the TV, lots of the TVs you see, except now there's some African, works that are more popularly watched, but largely you're watching Western media imagery. So you know who, Tom Cruise is, you know who Brad Pitt is, you know who all those people are. You're watching them at the movie theaters, you're watching them on television, you're watching Melrose Place, you're watching, everything. And so I grew up like a lot of people, even here in the United States, who weren't seeing themselves on the screen. I wasn't seeing a lot of people of my, heritage on the screen, especially not seeing people of direct African descent on the screen, or in things I was studying. I was actually kind of in a neo-colonial schooling system too. So I'm thankful that I did get to, read Jane Austen and tons of Shakespeare and came to the United States very, equipped to handle the Western theater realm or whatever realm. But I also felt deeply deprived. And it's ironic because I was on the continent. But even there, I was deprived. I only picked up Things Fall Apart once I was in college in the United States. So, the idea that, so then, of course, I got a little enraged and consequently started to go on a certain track with how I wanted things, I wanted that, what was missing from what I'd experienced to start be what I saw and what I put out there. So, yeah, it was a choice where largely when I would watch or read anything about colonization, it was somehow always from the perspective of the colonizer. And I thought, wow, I grew up in a country where we were still recovering from colonization when I got there 3 years after it had ended. And, there's a lot of wounds and recovery in the mind, in the spirit, and the soul, not to mention the economics that one is dealing with. Then I grew up right next door to South Africa, where I couldn't even go at all throughout my childhood or my teenage years because of apartheid. And, witnessed the moments when they got to actually come to the point of, freedom and self-rule. So to me, the idea that constantly the representation I saw of the African was through the perspective of those who had colonized us drove me crazy. So what I wanted to do when I got to the United States and started to decide to create, I really started to create because I couldn't find the representation. And so I had never planned to be a writer or to write a play. That hadn't been my plan at all. But what happened was I said, I can't find it, so I've got to do it. And the last thing I think is needed is, more of that. So let me actually really just, and what I also noticed, so I started to create these pieces about that sort of thing. But what I also noticed was that once, it was kind of my own little mad scientist experiment, because I couldn't find it. And then once I felt you put, not always, but when you put a person who was of a Caucasian, for instance, in the center of a story or in the story, the focus tended to go to that person, even if they were surrounded by 10 Black people. And I thought, what's that about? How about I just take him out and just make you only focus on me, not me, but the character who's a woman and who's from Africa. And so that's why I said, let me experiment, because I haven't really seen it done. Let me see. So it was kind of like me being a little bit of a mad scientist. And I still do this every single first preview of a new play. I'm like, are they just going to be blank-faced and not get it? Is it not going to transfer? Is it not going to translate? Or is it my hypothesis is that it will, because I trust and believe that humanity transfers, and if the story is worth its salt, it will have a resonance. But, let me just sit back and see. I've done all I can do for now. I'll get back to work tomorrow. But that first preview, I just have to sit back, throw back a glass of wine, which I do, which I just did the other day. And see what happens. And so, the idea of definitely within the continuum too, it was 2 Black women from their perspective, and then the convert and Eclipsed. It was, no, we're gonna take out the men, we're gonna take out the colonizer, you're just gonna spend time with these folks, the ones you never hear, and let's see if it translates, if it transfers. Hope it does.
Thank you.